Well, I want you to think of the last time you faced something in life that was just too big for you, too big for you to deal with. Maybe you heard some news and that news just knocked you. Maybe you heard news of the death of someone or your health, news of something like that, and it just really rocked you and you think, this is too big, I can't handle this. Or maybe there was a situation that just seems hopeless. You know, you just face situations in life and it just seems dark and it seems helpless and it just seems like there's no way out of this. It could be a relationship situation, it could be a family situation, it could be your work, it could be your finances, whatever it might be. It might just seem dark and there is no way for you to get out. You think, what can I do? Is there any help here? Well, maybe you feel there's a situation too big when you think of your temptation, when you think of how you struggle. It just seems too strong. And you just give in time and time again. You okay, Maureen? Should we get a glass of water for Maureen, maybe? Yeah. Oh, she's got some. Okay. No, it's fine. Don't worry. Just want to get there before it's too late, isn't it? That's the problem. Okay. You okay? Great. So thinking of a situation that might be too big for you in your life, whether it's news you've had or a situation that seems hopeless, maybe temptations that we face, or maybe there's a situation where you want to tell people about your faith. You want to tell people about what you believe, but it seems too scary. You know, people just seem maybe a bit antagonistic or apathetic towards what you believe and think, it's just too big, I can't do it. Well, these moments that we face, things can feel very scary, can't they? And we can feel very alone in them. And they can lead us into a path of being, in despair. Think, I don't know where I can turn, I don't know where to go. And especially when the air that we breathe around us and the words that we hear a lot, is words like this, you've got this. And you think, yeah, but I don't think I have. It's too big. Or we hear people say, come on, you can smash this, you can do it. And we feel I should be stronger. Everybody else seems to be coping, but I'm the only one who seems like these things are too big for me. Everyone else seems fine, but I'm floundering. And sometimes when we face these situations, I don't know if you have this, but they can just seem to come one after another. I think I've told you before that when we were younger, Mum and Dad used to take us to the caravan, and we used to go down to the beach in Llangrannog. And in Llangrannog, one of the great things about that beach was I remember the waves were massive. So especially if we went down later at night, we'd go into the sea, and we'd just have these massive waves, and we'd love kind of jumping into them or taking a bodyboard down there, and it was great fun. But I do remember one time where I jumped into a wave, and it took me under. And it's quite scary. I'm not the strongest of swimmers. So I kind of got up, and just as I was nearly got to my feet, another wave came and pulled me under. And again, you're kind of trying to grasp your breath, but you don't quite get there, and another wave hits. I was okay in the end, obviously, I lived to tell the tale, but it was in those moments, it was scary. And maybe it feels like that sometimes in life. You can just get hit by things, and you just seem to be getting to your feet, and something else comes and knocks you off. And life is so scary sometimes, and things are too big for us. The reason I've said that is because when we come to this situation, Elisha and his servant face a scene that seems terrifying and too big for them. And yet this passage shows us truths about God that can help us as we face those times. Now, before we jump into the passage, just 3 things to keep in mind as we face things in life that are too big for us. One thing is this: remember your location. Your location. We're in a world that is broken and fallen. We're in a world where, since Genesis 3, our relationship with God is broken. We need that fixed, and only Jesus can do that. But also our relationships with each other are strained and broken because, as a result of that, our relationship even with this earth, the Bible says, the earth is broken, natural disasters and things like that. You know, our bodies are falling apart. So it is no surprise that we face things that are too big for us in a world that is now broken and not originally how God intended it to be. But also remember not just our location, but remember our limits. Situations in life are too big for us, and we shouldn't in one sense be surprised. We were created to be dependent. We were created to lean on God, to trust in Him. You see again in the Garden of Eden, you see that God has to explain everything to Adam and Eve. And the picture there it's showing us is, without God, this life doesn't make sense. We were created to know Him, to enjoy Him, to lean on Him. And so when we push Him out of our lives, of course life is going to be too big for us. We're told, aren't we, you can do this. We're kind of one of the lies of Satan, I think, is to give us our independence and to say, you don't need anybody or anything else. You don't need God. You can do it on your own. And so we think we're told we're big enough, we're strong enough, we're wise enough, we're powerful enough. And the temptation is to think, right, I can do this. But again, when we come to what the Bible shows us, we were never meant to live like that. Remember your limits. And as well as remembering our kind of location, our limits, we also need to remember there's a battle going on. So spiritually, there's a realm the Bible talks about that we can't see. And in our kind of world, in the Western world, it seems very weird to talk about the spiritual realm. Other places in the world are absolutely fine talking about it. But we, just because we can't see it, if I can't see it, it can't be there. That's kind of the secular world we live in, isn't it? We're in a place where there's no windows, no doors. If I can't see it, this is all there is. But the reality is that we're spiritual beings. And there is a spiritual battle going on. And so when you factor that into our life, facing things too big for us, again, that should make us see, we need to remember hidden things. So Paul says in Ephesians 5, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities and cosmic powers over this present darkness and against the spiritual forces in the heavenly places. So Paul says in 2 Timothy, fight the good fight. We're in a battle. And the problem is we forget. And so our adversary, Peter says, the devil prowls around like a roaring lion seeking to devour us. So we shouldn't be surprised when we face tough situations. You've got an enemy who hates you, doesn't want you to be a Christian, doesn't want you to be in church, doesn't want you to be following Jesus, and he'll put every kind of obstacle in the way to stop those things happening. So when life is too big, when we face things that are like that, just remember those things as a foundational truth. But look, in this passage, we see 3 truths about God that I pray will help us as we face things in our life that are too big, that might be an encouragement to us, might help us through it. So what are these things? Well, the first thing we see here is the knowledge of God. What should encourage us and help us when life seems too big? The knowledge of God. So in this story, what's going on? So Israel are under constant attack from their enemies, the Syrians. They're one of the neighboring countries. Time and time again, they would come and they would attack, they would pillage, they would capture children, capture women and take them away as slaves. And so the king of Syria, we're told in this passage, has a plan. Let's set up our camp here. We'll dash in, dash out, and then we'll flee away. So Syria went down to their camp, were ready to attack Israel, but over the border, verse 9, Elisha already knew what was going to happen. So God's prophet, Elisha, had this message, this information from God, and he sent a message to the king of Israel, and he said, the king of Syria is going to attack this place, so go there and be prepared. So what happens? Syria think they're going to do the surprise attack, but they're ready and waiting at the army of Israel saying, yeah, we knew you were going to come. And this happened, we're told, did you notice that in verse 10? Strange way of saying it, isn't it? He saved himself there more than once or twice. It was maybe 3, maybe 4, I'm not sure how many times, but it kept on happening that God gave the message to Elisha, Elisha told the king, and the king was ready. And you can imagine Syria, they were one of the superpowers of the day, being frustrated by this small nation of Israel. And every time they tried a surprise attack, something went wrong, or they knew what was there. And the king of Israel's response, verse 11, we're told that the mind of the king of Syria was greatly troubled because of this thing. And he called his servants and said to them, will you not show me who of us is for the king of Israel? So he's thinking, there's a mole here, there's a spy who's leaking information to Israel. That's why they're prepared all the time. And who is this? Who's leaking it? Well, the servant knows in verse 12. He says, none, my lord. It's not us. But Elisha, the prophet who's in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words you speak in your bedroom. So Elisha's the issue here. He's the one who knows what you're saying. He knows all of these things. And so what happens? Well, he says, right, let's go and find Elisha. Let's go and find him. We're told, verse 13, he is in Dothan. And so they've got their horses and chariots and the great army to go to Dothan and surround that city. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? He's planning to attack the person who knows every move he's making, so he's going to know this move as well. But anyway, he thinks that's the best plan. Now, again, pause on the narrative there for a moment. What does this tell us about God? God has given Elisha this information, so God is a step ahead all the time. Not just a step ahead, the Bible says he knows the end from the beginning. He knows it all. He knows what's going to happen in your life, in my life. He knows what's going to happen day to day. Nothing takes God by surprise. Nothing happens without his knowledge. And that's a truth for us to reflect on for a moment. God knows everything. That's not just in this passage in 2 Kings that says that. Think about Psalm 139, a wonderful psalm. It says this, "O Lord, you've searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's high, I cannot attain it." See what he's saying? You know everything. You know my thoughts, you know my actions, you know my words, you know our paths, you know how many times I stand up and sit down. Do you know that about yourself? Have you got a little tally sheet that you keep? Or just stood up again, sat down? No, of course we don't. God knows you better than you know yourself. He knows you through and through. He knows everything about you. Every word you say, every thought you make, all is known to God. Now, I think there's 2 responses to that. First one is this. Maybe that makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. So God knows everything about my life, everything I've ever said or done, every place I've ever been, every thought I've ever made. And if he knows that, then surely he's not going to want anything to do with me. If you think if the person next to you knew that much, maybe you think they wouldn't even want to talk to me or sit here. That means things in the dark, he knows. Things in your past, he knows. And that's what this morning makes God's love and grace towards us even more amazing. He loves you and he knows you better than anyone else. We try and hide the worst parts so that people might like us a bit more. God sees that. We're an open book to him and he still loves you and he still says, come. That's the depth of his love. Remember the hymn that says, your open sins, your secret sins can all forgiven be. That's wonderful news, isn't it? He knows and he still loves. So if you feel uncomfortable by God's knowledge, that's an encouragement. But there's also another encouragement. When we face these things in life that just seem too big for us, God knows. He's seen it. It hasn't taken him by surprise. I find it such a comfort to tell myself that often. This hasn't taken God by surprise. He knows all of this. And we're going to see he can use it for his good and our good as well, his glory and our good. When we feel all alone, when we feel like nobody understands what I'm going through, God has seen it and he knows it. And there's a comfort in that. It doesn't answer all these questions, but to know that you're not on your own, to know that somebody's seen and acknowledged, that's a huge help to us. And as 1 Peter says, then we can cast all our anxiety on the Lord because he cares for you. He knows. So the knowledge of God in the face of when life is too big is a big help to us. The second thing we see here is the protection of God. The protection of God. So the king of Syria finds out Elisha is the man. So the command goes out, verse 13 and 14, go and seize him. Go and get him. So they send him down to the place where he is in Dothan, and he sends horses and chariots and a great army. Now you might remember this from a few weeks ago when we were looking at Joshua. That is shorthand for this is the most high-tech, strongest army and kit that they had at the time. Horses and chariots were like the drones, the tanks, the air missiles, the airplanes, what they called, those things. All of that. And so it's basically this small little place where Elisha is with his servant, and he sends all these drones and these tanks, and they're all there to go and get Elisha. And you see why? The king of Syria was angry. Nobody messes with us. Elisha is going to pay. And so meanwhile, Elisha's there, and his servant, and we see the servant, verse 15, the servant of the man of God arose early in the morning and went out. I like to picture this. He's got his coffee, he's just made his coffee, he's got his newspaper under his arm, kind of opens the door, and then he drops his mug, drops his paper, because he sees around him these drones, the tanks, all facing and pointing at him. You can imagine even maybe one of those infrared things, just there, waiting, pointed at him. And he calls out to Elisha, Elisha, we've got a bit of a problem here. What are we going to do? 2 of us. the most powerful army on the earth here to get us. What's going to happen? And Elisha's reaction, verse 16, is just amazing, isn't it? Do not be afraid. What? Don't be afraid. What do you mean? And then he goes on to say, verse 16, those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Now, what is he talking about? Elisha's servant must be thinking, are you going mad? There's two of us. Anyway, counts again. 2, and I can see so many more. But then Elisha prays in verse 17, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. There was something about this situation that Elisha's servant couldn't see. There was something that he couldn't grasp and he wasn't aware of. Something that physically, so his physical eyes couldn't see. So Elisha prays, show him, God, the reality. Show him what's going on behind the scenes. And the reality, we see there. The Lord opened his eyes, verse 17, of the young man, and he saw that, behold, the mountains were full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So like a ring protecting Elisha and the servant were these heavenly hosts, protecting him from the most powerful thing that earth could throw at him. And suddenly, the situation in a moment is changed, isn't it? Oh, hang on, there is more than us, than them. Now, what difference does this make to us today? I think there's a few things. One is this. Remember, as we face situations in our life that seem too big for us, we can't see the whole picture. We can't see the whole picture. Here's Elisha's servant. He couldn't see something that was protecting him, even though it was there. And we need to realize that God is protecting us, even when we don't realize. We lose perspective, don't we, when we forget the unseen. Because we're just thinking on our level. We're thinking, well, if this happens, this happens, this happens, and we try and work it all out. Whereas God can see the bigger picture. He can see the bigger elements of it, and there is more going on than meets the eye. The other thing to remember here is, as I mentioned at the start, is it's a spiritual battle, isn't there? We have an enemy, and he wants to attack. He is prowling around like a roaring lion, and sometimes we feel the enemy is too big. He's too strong. Our temptations just are too strong. But remember the big picture. In 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, Paul says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful. He'll not let you tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he'll provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. He's saying, look, there's always a way out. You're not on your own. There's other people who've been through this as well. These things that seem too big, remember God's provision for you. Remember why Jesus came. 1 John tells us the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. He's a defeated enemy. Yes, he makes loud noises. Yes, he can create some damage. But the God who is with us is bigger than him. He is the defeated foe. Little children, 1 John says as well, he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. And so when we remember that, when we're on God's side, who is bigger than our enemy, then we hear the command of God, which he repeats, remember, over 365 times, fear not. So what are you facing at the moment that seems scary and big and too much? God's word to you today is, don't be afraid. Now, I know that doesn't answer everything, but coming from God, he wants us to hear that. He wants us to be reminded of it. Don't be afraid. And remember, ultimately, when we think big picture on this, we can know that God knows the end. I've said before, haven't I, but the book of Revelation. If you read Revelation, we'll get there soon in our RBT. We'll read that together. When you read it, there's some scary bits in that. Some bits that seem crazy and confusing. You think, what is this saying? Well, there's a story told of some Bible college students in America who were studying the book of Revelation. They couldn't get their heads around it. So to clear their heads, they went and played basketball. And in the basketball was the caretaker. What do they call them over there? The janitor. So the caretaker was in there and doing whatever he was doing in the gym. And he could overhear these boys talking about the book of Revelation, how confused they were by it. And he says, I can understand the book of Revelation. And they looked at him and said, well, we're the ones training here. But how do you understand it? He says, it's easy. 2 words. Jesus wins. Jesus wins. And that's it. With all everything else is taken out of the way, that's ultimately the big message of not just Revelation, but the whole Bible. Jesus wins. One day everything will be put under his feet. And so that means he is working all things together for this one purpose. We, as Corrie ten Boom wonderfully illustrates, isn't it? We see the back of the tapestry, which is just a mess and chaos. God sees the wonderful full picture. He is weaving these threads. He is working things out because he can be trusted and he knows what's going on. We don't see the whole picture. God does. Remember, as we're in the situation that seems too big for us, the one who is with us is bigger than our situation. As Jesus, remember the disciples in the boat? They were terrified by the storm, but Jesus was bigger than the storm all along. The one who is with you in your heart, the Lord Jesus, is bigger than your current storm. And he in a moment can quieten it. So we don't see the whole picture, let's remember that. But also here, we need to realize that the chariots are coming for us. The chariots are coming. What do I mean by that? Well, perhaps you look at your situation and you think, there's no way this can be true for me. It's okay for an Old Testament kind of prophet, but I've been through so much pain and heartache and struggles, the chariots must have missed me by. Yeah, so God wasn't protecting me at that time. They were too late, or God doesn't care. But if you're a child of God this morning, I want to remind you of a quote I read many years ago by Paul Tripp. He said this: nothing will enter your life that doesn't come through the filter of his grace. Nothing. Nothing will enter your life that doesn't come through the filter of his grace. How can that be? Well, there's a great illustration within the Bible through this passage of this. Because remember where Elisha is, where the attack was made in verse 13 is called Dothan. And Dothan, if you look that up in the Bible, this isn't the only place where Dothan is. There's another story that happens in Dothan in Genesis 37. Joseph, remember Joseph and his brothers? So in Genesis 37, in Dothan, Joseph was thrown into a pit. Remember the situation? Joseph with this arrogant so-and-so, and he was telling his brothers how great he was and how he was going to be better than them, and they just got fed up, and so they just threw him into a pit and said, right, we're going to sell him into slavery. Oh no, they're going to kill him first, and they said, no, here's these people coming from Egypt, let's sell him as a slave. So they sold him into slavery in Egypt. Then as Joseph is taken into Egypt, there's this miscarriage of justice with Potiphar and his wife, and he ends up being thrown into prison. So here he is, he's gone from being his father's favourite son into a pit, into prison for something he didn't commit. Then he helps people out in prison, and they say, I will remember you, but they forget, and he's there for years and years and years and years in darkness. And it's tempting to think, isn't it, where were the chariots in Dothan then for Joseph? Where were they? They weren't looking after him, surely. But when you look at the bigger picture of Joseph's life, what do we see? What wouldn't have happened if he hadn't have ended up in that pit? Well, Joseph's family would have died of starvation. Do you remember Joseph ended up in Egypt and he was put in charge of, because he could interpret those dreams, he was put in charge of looking after all of Pharaoh's crops and everything. So that they had 7 years of strong crops, and they stored that up, and they had enough to get them through the famine. And his family came to get food from Egypt, so he protected the family by ending up in Egypt. Which ultimately, if you play that down the line, the family that was protected was the promised line, the family of Judah, which ultimately Jesus came from. And so God was protecting not just Joseph, but his family and the whole world in that moment. Not only that, but Joseph was transformed. As I said at the start of the Joseph story, he's arrogant, he's spoilt. But by the end of it, he's changed by God's grace. He's transformed. Joseph was rescued in Dothan. Even though it didn't appear that was the case. So we might be wondering, where were the chariots for Joseph? But can you see? They were there all along. And perhaps you're wondering, well, where are the chariots for me? With what's happening in my life, with what's happened in my life. Can you see, with the eyes of faith, Lord, help us to see the chariots are there. God is working, and he is protecting. Just we might not be able to understand or see what he's doing at this stage in our life. God is working through his own means. However dark your place, the chariots are there. And again, you might think, well, but how can I be sure? Again, this is happening to Elisha, thousands of years ago. How can I be sure of this? Well, again, instead of looking back to Genesis, now let's look forward in the Bible to another situation that this passage reminds us of, and maybe reminds you of when you think of the angels and the protection that he had. It reminds us of the greater Elisha, the true prophet, the word from God, Jesus. Remember on the night he was betrayed, he was kissed by Judas in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the army came to get him. And his servants, those who were with him freaked out, didn't they? And one of them got the sword out, they struck the servant's ear. And Jesus said this, "Put your sword back in place. Do you not think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send more than 12 legions of angels?" But how then should that happen if all the scriptures need to be fulfilled? Jesus could have had the chariots of fire protecting him, but he chose not to call on them. Now, why did he do that? Well, Jesus didn't come to be saved. He didn't come to have God's presence with him the whole time. He came to be abandoned on the cross. So in our struggles, the gospel reminds us, and Jesus reminds us, he was abandoned so that in our trials we never would be. He took what we deserve. So do you deserve to have God's protection? No. Do we deserve that at all? No. But Jesus did, and he's earned for us the perfect protection of his wonderful love and grace. So when we're in the place of darkness where we think, what is going on? Look up at with the eyes of faith. The chariots are there. Lord, you're doing something. I don't get it. I don't understand. But one day I will see. So the protection of God is there. So that's the knowledge of God, the protection of God. And finally, very briefly, notice here the grace of God. Elisha prays 3 times in this passage. Once for his servant's eyes to be opened. It's all to do with blindness, interestingly. But the next time, verse 18, he prays for the enemies to be struck with a blindness. Not total blindness, but some kind of confusion, I think. Otherwise, they'd have said, can you not see all of a sudden? It's like, no, I can't see either. But I think it's some kind of confusion. Because Elisha says, come this way. I'll take you to where you want to go. And so Elisha leads them, and then he prays a 3rd time, verse 20, open the eyes so they can see, and they realized they were in Samaria. Basically, they were now surrounded by the people they were going to attack, surrounded by their enemies. I think, wow, what's going to happen to us here? And the king says, verse 21, shall I kill them? Here are our enemies, the one who have pillaged us, the one who have come and taken all the things, they've been horrible to us. Shall we kill them? And his answer is, no. Verse 23, go and get them a meal. Go and get them a meal. So he prepared a great feast for them. Here are enemies, but they were being treated not as enemies, but as friends. Now that's a wonderful picture of what we've done this morning. You see, we are, the Bible tells us, naturally enemies of God. We've gone against him. We've used his world and his stuff and ignored him. So we're born enemies of God. But how does he treat us? He invites us around a table. And he says, come, let me show you how much I love you. I'm not going to give you what you deserve. I'm going to give you what you don't deserve. I'm going to show you kindness and grace. There's a story, a true story that was in the 90s in South Africa. There was a thing happened that Nelson Mandela set up called the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. The idea was that because there were so many horrendous racist things that had happened over the years, if a white policeman or army officer came and faced those he'd mistreated and confessed his crime, fully acknowledged his guilt, then he wouldn't be tried or punished for that crime. So if they owned up and said, I did this, then Mandela said, we're going to forgive you for that. Some people weren't happy about it, but Mandela said the country needs healing more than it needs justice. That was his kind of take on it. And at one of these hearings, there was a man called Van der Broek, and he remembered an incident. He told of an incident where he took this mother's 18-year-old boy and burnt his body. Not only that, a few years later, he went to the same house and took the father and did the same to the father. And the wife was forced to watch as he burnt both of their bodies on this wood pile. And so here they were in the courtroom. The mother, who had seen these atrocities happen, and this policeman who'd done these horrible things. And the judge says, well, what do you want from Mr. Van der Broek? And there was silence, you can imagine, in the courtroom. And she said this, I want firstly for him to go to the place where he burnt my husband and child's body, and I want him to gather up the dust for a decent burial. And the policeman said, of course, I'll do that. And next she said this, but there's another request. Mr. Van der Broek took all my family away from me, and I still have a lot of love to give. Twice a month, I would like for him to come to the ghetto, spend a day with me, so I could be a mother to him. And I would like Mr. Van der Broek to know that he's forgiven by God, and that I forgive him too, and I would like to embrace him so he can know my forgiveness is real. And in that courtroom, apparently, spontaneously people started singing Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Can you see enemies brought together? That's grace. And that's what we see in this story, but that's a picture of what God has done for you and for me. We're enemies. We deserve nothing from him but being abandoned. But Jesus took that. He was mistreated as we deserve so that we could be welcomed as he deserved. Remember, he was an outcast of his family so we could be treated like loved ones. Now, maybe today, for the first time, you need to realize or say, I'm far from God, but I can see he's done this for me, and so I need to turn to what he's done and trust in him. He is a God who welcomes enemies and blesses enemies. That's the grace of God, not through what we've done, but what through he has done for us. And that helps us, doesn't it, when we face these situations that are too big for us? Because sometimes we can face tough times and think, God's punishing me. Something in the past I've done, God is punishing me for what I've done. But this, remember, shows us he can't punish us because the punishment was paid in full on Christ. Does he sometimes use things to discipline us and shape us and to make us more like Jesus? Yes, like a loving father. And there's proof of his love for us. But you're not being punished. It is all now coming through that filter of God's grace. So if you're feeling overwhelmed this morning, maybe another wave has just hit, you're being dragged under, let's remember these truths together. The knowledge of God. He knows what we're going through. The protection of God. The chariots are there. And he is working out his purposes and his wonderful grace to enemies like us. Let's just spend a few moments reflecting and thanking God for his love for us in the midst of our trials. And then we'll close by singing our last song, which will be Amazing Grace. Let's just spend a few moments in silence reflecting.